Hello, everyone. I know. I'm not going to move on until you've all said hello back. Thank you all for coming again tonight. Some of you are very familiar faces, some very new faces. So thank you all for joining us this evening. Obviously, we're here tonight to talk about RSE, Relationships and Sexuality Education. Firstly, I'd like to introduce ourselves, Kim and Lucia, who Kim herself, the founder of Public Child Protection Wales. Public Child Protection Wales was founded in 2020. Kim had been on a small-time mission to start spreading the word about RSE. We soon got joined, and it soon became apparent there was a huge lack of safeguarding going on in schools, and this was something Kim felt very passionate about, and PCP Wales was born on the back of it. For 3 years now, PCP, and in particular Kim and Lucia, have been tirelessly campaigning all over the country, but not just this country, all over the UK, in England and in Scotland, working hard to try and bring awareness to the public for the future of our children and their education and the mandatory element of relationship sexuality education and a new curriculum bill. The way this evening will go is the girls will do legislation and information on CSE, Comprehensive Sexuality Education, which is something our RSE is derived from. And we'll have a little break, and then there will be some lesson content. I will let you know beforehand, the lesson content can be quite, well, no, not quite. It is uncomfortable to see. It is uncomfortable to listen to. But we need to show you stuff. This information has been collected from all over the UK, but all of us have the same resources. So we're able to look at the other countries, see what they're teaching, and we have a good idea of what is coming into Wales, or what has started coming into Wales. And over the last year, this is starting to get confirmed by parents reaching out and being able to provide us with the lesson content, which confirmed to us is the same content as the rest of the UK. Then we will go into how did we get here? So how all of this came about, how legislation came into place in the first place, and the government responses. Our government responses have been vast, but very little, and Kim will go into that into great detail. So thank you all. At the end, we'll have some questions, so I will either bring you the mic, you can come and ask a question yourself, or if you just want to let me know the question, I will ask it. There is no silly questions. I can guarantee you someone will be grateful that you asked that question they didn't even know was a question in their own mind. So thank you again, and thank you, Kim, thank you, Lucia. I will hand it over to you wonderful ladies. Thank you.
Before we start, can we just have a round of applause for Adele? Because
yes.
Adele has introduced us as founding members, but so is she. And when she's introducing, she kind of forgets about herself. So a big round of applause to Adele as well.
Yay.
We wouldn't be here without her. So today we're going to talk to you about RSE, Relationship and Sexuality Education, which is actually CSE, Comprehensive Sexuality Education. It comes in 3 parts. We've got legislation, framework, and then lesson content. Very often you will be passed a piece of lesson content, or you will be shown framework. You will never ever have all 3 put in front of you. All 3 are very, very important. So here in Wales, the government has mandated a new sex education within our curriculum. It's part of the mandatory subjects, one of 4 mandatory subjects, which is English, RSE, Relationship and Sexuality Education, Religion, Values and Ethics, and Welsh. This has been mandated from age 3 to 16 with no parental opt-out. It is also something is called the whole school approach. So we're not dealing with a standalone subject that we're all used to. This is something that is embedded in every single subject across the curriculum. Now, when you look at section 77 of the Curriculum and Assessment Wales Act, it speaks of something called the RSE code. So the RSE code is what the teachers are giving to you now, the guidance published by the Welsh Government. And as you can see here, section 77 states, the RSE code procedure. 1, before issuing or revising the RSE code, the Welsh ministers must consult the persons they think appropriate, if any, and lay before Senedd Cymru a draft of the proposed code, or in the case of revisions, the proposed revised code. So in layman's terms, basically, they can change that RSE code anytime they want, and they don't have to tell you. So after a long to-in and fro-in, emailing, petitioning, and everything else, we actually took the government to court. We knew what we were dealing with. We knew we were dealing with a global agenda. We knew it was massive and we could never nail it in a simple case. So we went in with the view to reclaim our parental rights. We wanted to make it manageable. If we could get our parental rights back, we would be dealing with a singular subject, and that would have been easier to address. However, the Welsh Government lawyers argued in the High Court that parental rights do not exist. Parental rights aren't a thing. If they was a thing, they would be minute anyway. They argued this by using case law from European courts, okay? So they used European case law to argue there is no such thing as parental rights. So what this now means for the whole of the UK, and this will become more clear as the presentation goes on, this case law can and will be used against every citizen in the UK. And we can show you the evidence for that moving forward.
Okay, so what can you do as people, the public? First and foremost, inform all your friends and family about this RSE. Raise awareness. Send them over to our website, www.publicchildprotectionwales.org. Let everyone know, because there are so many people, even those who have got children, young children in primary school, there's so many people that still don't know, or they do know about it, but they don't know the magnitude and the harmful effects of this. So number 2, get the facts of this case law, the case law that Kim was telling you about. Now, this needs to be put out to every citizen in the UK. The judgment is on our website. Please do take the time to look through that judgment carefully, because you can use this in order to fight your case when you're speaking to the schools, etc. And number 3 there, say use the case law to your advantage.
So what that means is we have created case law from this case going into the High Court. And even though they've taken away our parental rights, this case law is very important. Not only does it pave the way for every low-income family in this country to potentially be awarded legal aid, it states this needs to be appropriate for each child. They cannot infringe on your religious or philosophical beliefs. These things are within this case law. So not only is it legislation, it has been reinforced by the High Court and underlined. Therefore, this is a useful tool. This tool tells us the schools are not allowed to indoctrinate. It tells us they're not allowed to teach things that's not fact. So this case law can and will be used against the citizens of the UK, but it also can and will be used against every teacher that oversteps the mark.
Okay, as Kim said earlier, this RSE actually comes from CSE, Comprehensive Sexuality Education. This is a global sex education. In some states of America, they've had this since the 1990s, and it wouldn't take long for you to see the detrimental effects of this CSE, this sexuality education.
So So this is the RSE code, what we just spoke about in the legislation. This is the guidance published by the Welsh ministers that teachers have to adhere to. There is evidence on our website, and it was proven in the High Court, that the RSE code, and as referenced by Welsh Government, is derived or co-constructed from UNESCO.
And here it is, UNESCO, this is the UNESCO guidance here, where teachers in the UK are asked to look at when they're co-constructing it. We're going to go through a couple of slides later to actually show you what is within these documents.
So UNESCO is a global framework, okay? And if you turn the front cover, it tells you that it's part of a 2030 global education agenda. So this is currently in 52 countries at the moment. What this education is all about, it's a rights-based approach, okay? And what you see there on your right are your children's sexual and reproductive rights. So your children now have sexual and reproductive rights which override your rights as a parent to protect your child. I urge every person in this country to read your child's sexual and reproductive rights, because these people believe children have the same sexual rights as adults. This is littered all throughout the documents, and this is currently in the classrooms now in Scotland. They're being taught to exercise their sexual and reproductive rights. So how do we know all of this? We know all of this because of the document here. The first document, the Sexuality Education in Europe and Central Asia. That document was published by International Planned Parenthood Federation. It's an overview of 25 countries, and it's assessing the sex education in each country. Page 174 is the study on England. And in the title, there's a little star. And when you look at the left-hand side of the page, it says, the studies were carried out in England, but they are to apply to the whole of the UK. Now, back at the beginning of this document, page 8, it clearly states that all 4 select committees of the UK adopted Comprehensive Sexuality Education in March 2017, with the view for legislative changes. So we've seen lesson content roll out across the UK, and here in Wales we've got this legislative change. So we're all in the same storm, we're just in different boats. What it also tells us, it tells us the framework they used in decision making. And this framework is this one here. The Standards for Sexuality Education in Europe. So this document was published in 2010. It's widely used. It is being used as a main framework in some countries. But this was the framework used that the decision makers in the UK agreed that this was the way we need to go forward with our education.
Okay, so now we move on to the matrix now at the bottom of this World Health Organization document. And if you can see, I don't know how well you can see this slide, at the top there it says 0 to 4. That's talking about years old. We're talking about children from birth. And if we look down to the third section, coming down here under sexuality, it clearly states there, enjoyment and pleasure when touching one's own body, early childhood masturbation. Then goes on to talk about pleasurable feelings in one's own body and express needs and wishes and boundaries in the context of playing doctors. This is very sexual, and we're talking about children from age 0. Again, then they've got about gaining an awareness of gender identity, and we all know where this is heading when they're talking to children this young about this. So the next slide, this is for children 4 to 6. Again, under sexuality, it talks about the enjoyment of and pleasure when touching one's own body, discovering of one's own body and genitals. And then if we sort of just go up to the fertility bit here, where it says myths relating to reproduction. So basically this is saying from the age of 4, they want children to know the actual way that babies are born. If we go on to the skill set there, where it comes to sexuality, they say talk about sexual matters. Apparently this is a communication skill for this age group. Consolidate their gender identity, and then use sexual language in a non-offensive way. Okay, so go on to the next slide, 6 to 9. So still we're talking about primary school children, very young. And it talks up here about sex in the media, including the internet, appropriate sexual language, then it's deal with sex in the media, and then at the end here in the attitudes, which is very concerning, an understanding of acceptable sex. Mutual, consensual, voluntary, equal, age-appropriate, context-appropriate, and self-respecting. This is for age 6 to 9. Children shouldn't even know what sex is at this age, yet the WHO here are suggesting that they need an understanding of what is acceptable sex and what is not acceptable sex. And then lastly, for the WHO document, is the 9 to 12 section. And this age here, they're expecting children to have their first sexual experience. They are still below the age of 13, which is actually statutory rape if a child does have sex at this age. It's not actually sex, yet they are stating here that they're expected to have their first sexual experience. Sexual behaviour of young people. Then we've got the gender orientation, so it's really sort of bringing in the trans issues here as well. If we move on to the attitudes, it's an acceptance, respect, understanding of diversity in sexuality and sexual orientation. So again, you know, we're talking about children who are nowhere near the age of consent. As we all know, the age of consent is 16. Yet these documents are assuming that children are already engaging in these sexual activities.
So we've literally just skimmed through a few, not even a total page there. This document is available on our website under the resources. We urge everybody to read it. It just keeps repeating. Sex should be mutually consensual, voluntary, equal, age-appropriate, context-appropriate, and self-respecting. That's repeated throughout. This document is from birth. And it also speaks about the sexual rights and how they want these sexual rights practiced. So please read this document simply because you need to understand what our decision makers were reading when they made this decision. But like we said, now we've shown you the UNESCO document, and you're probably thinking, well, what's the World Health Organization and UNESCO document got in common? They work in unison. So if you look on the inside covers of these documents, it tells you who they're in partnership with. So it's the International Planned Parenthood Federation, the UNESCO, United Nations, World Health Organization, and so on. So it clearly states, it even tells you who writes for them. So for UNESCO, it is SICAS, a woman called Nanette Ecker actually wrote this document. So this is the more updated version then. This is what's being pushed around the UK. This was published in 2018, and this is beefed up with rights. So it doesn't start from birth. It's not as graphic as the World Health Organization document. I suspect that's because people started reading that document and kicking off over it. But again, this document is a little easier on the eye, but again, this has got questionable pieces. It is, like I said, this is part of the global agenda. This is what the RSE code in Wales is derived from. Rights-based approach, human rights, children's rights, bodily rights, and most important of all, for them, sexual and reproductive rights.
Okay, so now we've got a couple of slides here from this UNESCO document. As Kim said, it's from 5 as opposed to birth. They do try and, if you were to read the document in its entirety, you may not think there's anything wrong, because they really do sort of butter things up and make it look a little bit more fluffy than the World Health Organization. However, we have picked out some slides here, and if you are to read that document, you will notice yourself, if you give it a good read, you will notice even more points which are concerning. But we've just picked out a couple ourselves here, and this first slide are the learning objectives for children ages 5 to 8. And here the key idea is people can show love for each other through touching and intimacy. And if you read that little bit there where it says what learners will be able to do, it talks about how people show love to each other through hugging, kissing, etc. But then it also says through sexual behaviours. Then we've got the key idea: children should understand what is and what is not appropriate touching. So children are expected then to define good touch and bad touch. Now, this might sound like a good thing to people who are not, who don't really understand what's going on. However, if you are someone who specialises in child sex abuse, or you know, something like that has happened to you yourself, you will actually understand that groomers are very good at what they do, and they are very good at grooming children and manipulating children. We have got a video later to actually show a child saying this, actually showing this in practice. Okay, so the next slide here, we are talking about 9 to 12-year-olds in this section. So we've got the key idea that people have sexual response cycle, whereby sexual stimulation can produce a physical response. And they want children to be able to describe male and female responses to sexual stimulation. When we go down the page here, and it's important to be able to make informed decision about sexual behavior, including whether to delay sex or become sexually active. This is really not something that children from age 9 should be making decisions about. However, UNESCO and other decision makers has got different ideas. So if you move across to this side of the slide, and it talks about it's important to understand the key features of pregnancy. So again, we're talking about children 9 to 12. If a child thinks they're pregnant or there is signs of pregnancy, this shouldn't be a case of just, you know, sorting out the pregnancy. That's actually rape. Those children shouldn't, the child should never ever be pregnant or thinking about whether they're pregnant at this age.
What you'll find throughout these documents and frameworks is a lot of lies. So for argument's sake, they will say things like masturbation does not cause physical or emotional harm, but it should be done in private. That's actually not true. And that's a big concern of ours. Throughout this documentation, they talk about porn, masturbation, relationships, but they are giving out false information. It's not correct information. You know, masturbation does affect you, but obviously they are not discussing that in school. It affects your sperm count, it affects your sensitivity to sexual responses, but they are not informing children about this. As you can see here, it says masturbation causes no physical or emotional harm, and we know that is not true.
So the next slide here, human beings are born with the capacity to enjoy their sexuality throughout their lives. So again, this is reinforcing that these people believe that human beings are sexual from birth. Very, very concerning. So this is, you know, it's saying 9 to 12, so people might say, well, they're only being taught that from 9, but nobody should be taught that human beings are born with the ability to enjoy sex and sexuality. And then we go over here where it's got about the social construction of gender and gender norms. Now, from the age of 5, They want these children to understand how important it is to understand the difference between biological sex and gender. So where we're hearing a lot now where gender is different to sex, these people are saying this, we know that gender is just another way of saying sex. It always has been the case. However, there are a lot of people out there, so-called experts, activists, that are trying to change the language and therefore putting this onto children as young as 5 and making them actually believe another lie.
So that brings us to the end of the first part, guys. We literally just skimmed through a bit of the legislation and the frameworks. We do not expect you to take everything we say at face value. We expect you to go and look at this stuff yourself. There is plenty more to see, too much for us to address in a single presentation. We're going to take a 10-minute break now, and when we come back, we will be looking at the lesson content, the trans toolkit, the RSE providers, and we'll be looking into drag time story hour. So thank you all very much for joining us for the first half, and we'll see you all in about 10 minutes.